Hi everyone. Hi. Hi. No tea this morning. I have got water. I'm doing a detox. So I'm fasting for one day. Yeah, we British people are very good at being conditioned to know our place generally. We don't feel that revolutionary spirit, even under great suffering, a lot of us don't. We have that stiff upper lip type of thing. But now I would say that we must recognize the times that we are in. Now you have to understand there is a risk to me saying this because I have a very distant mental health history in which, as a 19-year-old, I was thrown into the system by parents, and also the abuser's involvement wanted to silence what had happened to me. I was having flashbacks. I had post-traumatic stress. I turned, as people do, Christians, to the Bible. I had very little else to rely on. I made sense of it. I did a lot of research. And I don't mind if you want to belittle that or walk away or just not take it on because it's not your thing. That's your choice. And I quite understand that. I've never been one to just absorb other people's learning. I'd much rather learn for myself. That came from leaving home at 15 and needing to find out about, the salt of the earth type people and the system, because those are the people, the sort of the two things. And they have become much more so the two things at large today. This is what happens with communism. You have an upper tier, those keeping in with the upper tier, or fascism, and those underneath who are just leveled out by everything. In a proper democracy, there's a middle area. They would call that all the social constructs nowadays, because it's been so taken on board and used by the New World Order elites to reorganize society. I have seen and witnessed some serious abuse of people recently. Veterans, the little veteran attacked, a lovely slightly older lady on Facebook showing her bruises, what happened in at the coast at Dover. Not having that trigger mechanism response that you get when you're a member of a protected identity or a promoted identity, one that's allowed to be imbibed and used as a state tool, it just leaves you pondering for a bit. But I think the time for pondering has to end soon. We have to recognize that demise is deliberate. It's an anti-Christian one, although that doesn't solely mean Europeans. It's centered mostly on targeting European culture as an anti-colonial type of ideology that's taken root. This, actually culminates in an attack on God and the celestial to some degree in its ultimate form, because of the rejection of the hierarchy, because of the wanting of many within Black Lives Matter to think that it's consumerism or money that has prevented this us all being one sort of thing. So they want to attack the structure to the degree, all the way that goes all the way. But what the top people are doing is cleverly allowing them to get at people like my friends who are child abuse campaigners who had no racist aims whatsoever, and target them with slurs and Antifa meeting them after being programmed to see them as the enemy, which is very convenient for our government, who, Sadiq says he has the authority, he has been given authority to change the statues and the cultural things in London. If he's been authorized to do this, it makes you wonder, what a lot of us have been saying, and I have been stepped back from saying, a lot of us have stepped back from saying, were they authorized, to, as Gordon Brown seemed to have done, politically. You can search all these things, Gordon Brown authorizing, allowing the mass rape of our children. Was this authorized too? Have the deaths in the care homes been authorized? Because these are, obviously people with belief systems that are going to be against the new normal. Are the veterans not being housed? Is that authorized too? And I think you begin to get the picture. And I won't need to say a lot more for many of you out there. Our systems are less medieval. They're not triggered by the harm of our own kind. We don't feel it pulsate in the way other nations who've survived differently, more coherent, linked to each other, have done, because we've always believed in crossing the road like the Good Samaritan. But what that's been done and turned into now is crossing the road, not despite of difference, but because of it, and undermining those who don't agree with that principle or those who just want to survive which ultimately are floundering around our survival mechanisms, can be seen as something that's prejudice, anti-New World Order, because, you know, we're just flailing around. We want to survive in the way that we always have done. We don't want to be trained with unconscious bias so that we choose somebody who's more different to us, because that would be the right thing to do, any more than our Christian, you know, feeling already tells us to be kind. We don't need that kind of dictatorial programming that takes away the very consciousness of human understanding, the very consciousness of the differentiating between things that you learn as a child, to be changed into something else. Now, that's something that's what the Nazis would have done, isn't it? They tried to do, with changing people's focus into protecting themselves or protecting their ideology and turning away from others. No, we don't need to be reprogrammed, which is what they're trying to do. What this reprogramming represents is something that's biblical and cultural to do. You know, it's very clearly written in the Bible. They will change laws and customs, times and customs, festivals and customs. This is in the book of Daniel. You can check it. They will change laws and customs, times and customs, depending on which version, biblical version you read, as to be one of the signs of the end times. So it's very much cultural. The buying and selling. You know, I was reading this when I was 19. Nobody buys their cargoes of cattle and precious goods. I was wondering about Babylon then, the city of London, Babylon the Great, because it's connected to Gog and Magog, and they are the protectors of the city of London, ancient, and the city of London being a finance centre, as you know, 9/11 took down the finance centre in New York. It's the trade centre, buying and selling. So we are up against this system now, which is going to change the way that we buy and sell. Firstly, shutting down London, shutting down small businesses, but the bigger ones will be fine. So what we get now in communism is the levelling down of the smaller ones, or the tall poppies amongst the smaller, the lower levels. They want to shear them off. They want us to be the very much lower level, and there to be not much in between us and the hierarchy. So the middle classes and the structure and the stratosphere of what was there before would just be called, you know, social construct for us, but for the elites there's a different allowances. You know, they won't fall prey to these dismantling, denaturing effects the way that we will. As I said, there's an upper and the lower. This is what happens in communism. This happens in global communism. So the beast hates its rider ultimately. And consumed it, and totally consumes it, burns her with fire. The elites that ride the global communism, they hate, obviously, because ultimately communism hates oppressive wealth merchants who are using and exploiting. But you see, the communist basic level of the earth being unified as one won't realize that it's been exploited in this way by removing the middle tier. Because the intellectual middle tier won't be communicating in the same way from above and below to all the orders. There won't be a vein going all the way through culturally from, you know, the nation state to the elite. It will just be the bottom layer, like a ball, and the overlayer. So all the middle bits in between are just severed, not made redundant, as would be expected. So ultimately, I don't know how many years, how many decades it will take for the beast to try and attack Babylon, its rider. And it's had enough of its statues, it's had enough of trying to reaffirm itself and its position with social engineering, with Black Lives Matter, when it realizes that a high tide doesn't raise all ships, and that some sink in order for the raising. What will happen then? Will they ever get to the elites? Will they actually pull the system down and wreck it completely, as we are seeing the devastation in America the Great? Again, clue there. Read about Babylon the Great, for goodness sake. The power, the colonial type of power that prostituted all nations. And by that, I don't mean us ordinary folk. I think we know that it's the elite who've been guilty of this. We in Europe worked very hard to create and sustain, very much like it in very servile conditions, poverty-stricken conditions, used in the Industrial Revolution, cattle fodder, factory fodder. It tried to build something better. We are the ones who are going to get blamed by this decolonization force, while the elite use us again as cannon fodder for the more begrudging nations to pay back and get their what they want, and they'll hide behind us. So they'll hide the real privileged elite will hide behind the ordinary people, and they can replace it with whatever they want. They're not too bothered as long as they remain untouched. But will they remain untouched? Biblically, it says they won't. But what I fear is the total desecration that will be necessary in order to get to them once they've finished hiding behind us and removing the middle people. So what we have is, communism won't work. This huge upper tier exploiting, well, for a while it might do, especially with mechanisms they're using, technology, but it won't ultimately work because the rabble will be more enslaved, and the intellectuals will be removed. But sooner or later the rabble will, maybe at climate change, whatever the situation will occur, that they'll be given the chance to just knock it all down. All right. This is biblical. It's Revelations 18:6, the payback of Babylon for her luxury, for making all nations mad and drunk. Now, very much, who the gods wish to destroy, they first make mad. I mean, Enoch talked about this. He talked about, we must be completely mad, building our funeral pyre. And this represents Babylon, because a religious man would not have been unaware of the biblical quotations he was using. The book of Jude, foaming waves, rootless. It's like the river Tiber foaming up. Feeding only themselves, fault finders, grumblers, feeding only, just blown along, rootless, black spots at your wedding feast, feeding only themselves, flattering others for advantage. It's very much how the power system works today. If you can flatter others for advantage and use image and be insincere within the levels of power, we'll just go along with the prevailing tide. But the real truth of people that we have carried within us, the embodiment of our knowledge, our Christian heritage, is what they want to destroy. And this is something that a Christian nation would have been prepared for. Look at Babylon, the prostituting of nations, the payback. It's the decolonization that we are looking at. I want you just to be aware of that. If nothing else, the decolonization that we are looking at is Babylon's payback. Now, this isn't hard to research. I did this when I was 19. As I said, I learned about, the cattle. It was mad cow disease. Nobody buys their cattle, the precious goods. It made complete sense. And of course, all the foreign doctors there were really quite cruel. I was told that I would be in there a long time by one of them who was cruel to me, and I was just a number. But it's their payback time, you see. You don't realize this until you're vulnerable. If you're in a more affluent position, you don't realize how the real dynamics of people work and how the real jealousies amongst people and power really works. You don't, but think about these people being housed in hotels now, and the people who complain about it, how brutally they're treated. And it's their children who won't be given homes and have to wait, forever while they're, being mistreated, generally disadvantaged. But this disadvantage can't be allowed, a bit like the 3 million raped by the Red Army. There was a disadvantage that couldn't be allowed there as well. It took a long time for their testimonies to surface. And it took a long time for the people in Rotherham, their testimony to surface too. Because the levelling down is very convenient when it's all been raped and savaged and, people are demoralised, isn't it? You can then replant something new. Denature and replant. And this is the very Antichrist taking shape now. The humanist type of weird education Prince Charles received, that many of our leaders have done for generations now, have not really understood the pre-existing bonds that what they really mean, because they are mixing in different circles more and more, circles that just don't resemble the grassroots of people. So we have been abandoned. We are the abandoned class in this identitarian nightmare, which is reminiscent to totalitarianism, I think, of a kind that is just very sterile and evil and calculated. Okay, but it was bound to happen. I think people like Orwell and others have seen it forming, and people who've read the Book of Revelations, people who've talked about, nations being made completely mad and destroying themselves. It's just intelligent people know that's why they want to get rid of those people and use the sheer force. And as I said, if these things have been authorized, as Sadiq says, to pull down the statues, that really means that a lot of other things have been authorized as well, like the attacks on veterans and child abuse campaigners. And the silencing that's taken place, the paedophile silencing within Parliament. So we can say that this is real, and people who speak out are putting themselves in danger. I have a history of being somebody whose testimony of the end times and my stress and suffering from abuse was enough to diagnose and lock me up, basically. And I was as coherent as now, except I was terrified because I knew that's what my family wanted to do. I found my own way. I saw what real abuse and what real power struggles are all about, the types of people who carry them out, and they're not what is being projected in the media or by our politicians. And there are no politicians who are defending, the middle ground, the normality against the abuses that we're seeing. There's nobody, because they'd be just written off as standing in the way of progress, standing in the way and being prejudiced in some way for far less than pulling down statues of another culture, far less just through wanting to exist within the moral compass of decency that we came to believe, through our culture and through our generations was available for us and was the right way to live. And that's why we gave it to so many other nations in terms of kindness and allowing them to get into a position where they would exploit the way that they are, or be used to exploit by the upper tier the way that they are. It's extremely serious, extremely biblical, and it is the Antichrist being made forced to kneel and worship the image, which talks about the image as a statue as well, breathed life into. Now these things are not a coincidence that are being used by the elites. As it was Bush talked to Chirac about the end times war being a Gog-Magog war. Gog-Magog being very prominent to Britain and the British speaking sort of nations. They are determined to demonize Russia because it brings it into their the flawed ideology that many American evangelists believe in, where they idolize Israel and want to see Russia as being the beast from the east. Well, the beast from the east, when they talk about the dragon being worshipped because it gave power to the beast, we talk about the beast and Sadiq Khan using the images that we must all worship. Communism is the beast, if you like. It's a global communism, a commonality. And they worship the dragon because it gave power to the beast. And the dragon is the denaturing, going for the root, going for the sexual aspects that include many different things, denaturing by the root. The dragon is like a raping dragon, like it was, with St. George going each year after, the dragon was after the village virgin each year. So there's a real significance with these things coming together, and persecution that we are seeing. Just hold tight, everybody. Do your research, and don't be afraid to speak these things, because they will abolish your Christian religion. And this was the one thing that they want, that should have been there to prepare for these times. The expectation of an antichrist, not an anti-Semitic empire, not a anti-Islamic or Islamophobic empire, not a one that should be fixated on slavery, but one that was expected for Christians, an anti-Christian New World Order, unlike any other that went before, it says in Daniel, sort of consuming all within its path, meaning globalized, meaning everyone, everything, nobody really spared. So you think you're being given something here with your a high tide raises all ships. I think you're going to find out that a lot of us will sink, because that's what communism does in the end. It's full of holes and it doesn't float. It doesn't really float anyone's boat long term. So if you're being used, I would wake up, because this end times thing, is going to be a choice eventually. Are you with the Antichrist power that's using so many things, or are you going to stand true and speak the truth? Just speak it, I could give you loads of references. The Book of Jude, it's only 2 pages. Read it the correct way, with a correct political slant, ideological slant. You'll get it. And if you read about Babylon the Great, the fall of Babylon the Great, which is the great civilizations, which is decolonizing, and it talks about pay her back double for what she took from you. In her heart, she says, I sit as queen, privileged. I will never know mourning. So in 1 hour, her judgment will come. So London is being shut down, buying and selling again. I mean, they were talking about buying and selling in Nazi Germany, weren't they? Shutting down shops. I mean, there was some kind of thing going on with the falling of the Twin Towers, buying and selling. We are looking now at, buying and selling in a completely different sense. Human souls, they're talking about, diversity training, consciousness. This is your conscious soul. You don't give away that so that another identity can reign supreme or use it, let's say. No, I mean, I would have an unconscious bias towards, images, poetry that reflect my culture, images of men, women, children, families that I like the look of. And there's no way on earth you should be forced to fit into this dictatorship, which is taking root in all the workplaces and all the systems everywhere, where you should go against your natural instinct. To cross over the road despite difference is what we do, because Christian people do. To do it because it's fascism. It's the same as the Nazis. You're using identity because you think you'll get a bigger brownie point for it, and that's not how God works. He's the only one who judges value of people and adds up the tally and the tabs of their sins and the reality of what people are. It can't be modified and controlled by a state who treats us like animals based on, the sort of barcode, which is what it will be. So your identity is very important, your consciousness. Don't tell them that it has to be state, orchestrated and monitored. We're not animals. We have an internal consciousness and understanding, to cross the road despite of difference, not because of it, which is what they would do with their unconscious bias training. So, yeah, be very prepared. Be very afraid. No, be very prepared, I would say. How can you do that? Just fill yourself with knowledge and speak the truth if you can. Once you've got it, you'll know. You're going to want to speak when you know. Which is what I did when I was 19, and look what happened to me. But I was in a difficult situation. So if you're in a difficult situation, bide your time and your ways, and just think about when you can and what you can do, just to raise awareness before the dictatorship really gains hold on anyone who speaks the truth. Okay, I'm going to end it there, people. I see I've got 3 watchers. All right, bye for now.